everybody, it's Maria Willis from Card Bomb here with Tonic Studios, and today we're going to be checking out the new Stamp Club release called Party Animals. One of the things that I really love about this new release is that it's really easy to make some really cool, fun, but very simple cards, and then you can step it up and you can make some really complicated cards as well. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Let's head over to my desk and make some projects.
Alright, before we get started, let's take a quick look at this Party Animals stamp and die bundle that I'll be using today. I'm going to be making 3 cards during this video, and I will use every single one of these large animal stamps during the making of these cards. I will also use quite a few of the smaller stamps and many of the sentiments. I will be using many of the coordinating dies as well, but I will especially be focusing on the grass and cloud die to use as stencils and to create dimension on my projects. I will also be using one of these dies from the Banners and Strips die set to cut out one of the sentiments on my cards. Now, moving on to my first card. This card is going to be a very simple card. I'm just going to use the turtle, a sentiment, and one of the little heart stamps from the stamp set to create this card. I'm going to be stamping in black shadow ink. This ink is safe to use with both watercolors and alcohol markers, and I will be coloring with alcohol markers today. So when I color, I like to use my lightest color first to color in the entire image. Next, I grab my darkest color and I add the shading in, and I continue from darkest to lightest to blend those ink colors together. When I get to my lightest color, if I need to lighten things up, I can just go a little bit over it with that lighter color ink and it will lighten the shadows. When I was done with my markers, I decided that I still wanted to have a little bit more shading, so I grabbed my Nuvo watercolor pencils and I used 2 of the greens just to add a little bit more shading. I went in first with the lighter color green and second with the darker color green, and I just colored very lightly, adding some subtle shadows to the rest of the turtle. Next, I grabbed 2 pink markers so that I could color in that heart, and this card is nearly done. I've cut that card face down to 4 by 5 1/4 and put foam adhesive on the back so that I could put it on a card base and have it framed. For my second card, I'm going to be using that hippo, so I'm going to be die cutting this, which means I can just stamp that hippo in the corner of my cardstock. So I stamped that in black shadow ink, and I'm going to do all the stamping at once. So I'm stamping my sentiment in clear embossing ink on black cardstock, and I'm going to be heat embossing that in white embossing powder. Once that sentiment is set, I'm going to use one of these Banners and Strips dies to cut that out. I'm going to tape it down with a little bit of washi tape, put it between my cutting plates for my tangerine die cutting machine, and I'm going to crank that through, and that will end up cutting my sentiment out perfectly with that little banner strip. So here's what that looks like when it's done, and when you get a close-up of it, you can see that the ends have these perfect little flags. Now let's get back to the hippo, which I've colored off screen and now I've die cut. So I've also gone ahead and colored this little flower bouquet, and this is basically the same layout that we used for our first card, but this time I want to take it up a notch. So I'm going to use that grass die cut as well as the cloud die, and I'm going to take some paper that is 6 inches wide, and I'm just going to run it through my die cut machine so that I end up with a die cut that's attached to a larger piece of paper. These are going to be my homemade stencils. You can also do this out of acetate, but acetate is difficult to see on camera, so for today's video I'm using white cardstock. Now to create the other side of the stencil, you're going to rotate the paper and flip it over. Rotate and flip. That way, when you do these die cuts on the second side, you'll have the opposite profile that you did the first time on the front of your stencil. Now I'm using masking paper to create a mask so that I have only the center of a circle exposed on my card. I'm using one of the negative portions of the stencil to ink blend in 2 tones of green so that I can get some realistic looking grass at the bottom. Once I peel off that stencil, you can see what it looks like. Now I'm going to use the positive piece of the stencil to cover that up so that I can ink blend the sky without ruining my grass. I'm ink blending with one of the Nuvo large blending brushes, and these blending brushes are such a dream to blend with. effortlessly you can have these flawless, dreamy backgrounds. Even when you put the brush directly to the paper, you don't end up with a big circle of ink. They just blend so perfectly and so smoothly. So whenever you're looking for a lighter application of ink over a large background, I recommend using these brushes. If you want to apply a heavier amount of ink like I did with the grass, I do believe the brushes with the handles are a little bit easier to use. After you peel off your mask, this is what you're left with. And now I'm just going to go ahead and add my hippo on. He's already got foam tape on his back. So I'm popping him on, and I'm going to add the sentiment just below him. And before I am done with this card, I just added a couple of sequins to give it a little bit of bling. Here's a close-up of what that card looks like when it's done. And now we're going to move on to the third card. I am using an ink cube to just drag ink back and forth across some grass that I wanted to color in with a heavy coating of ink. And I'm also using the negative portion of the die cut so that I can ink blend some darker grass onto the bottom of my card face. I'm going to layer the die cut on top of that so that I will have multiple layers of grass on the bottom of my card. Now I'm using my card stencil to make another background full of clouds. I'm using the same colors as I did on my last card, so I'm just using a darker blue and then a blue-green for the bottom of the card. And now you can see that I'm going back and forth between the two styles of blending brushes, and that's because I wanted to use the handled brush to apply a heavier coat of ink right at the bottom of each cloud layer so that it looked like there was some depth and that some of the clouds were behind the other clouds. Now I've taken two die cut clouds and I colored one in pink and one in purple, and I'm going to layer those at the top on top of my background so that I can have layers of floating clouds. And at the bottom of my card, I'm also going to pop up that lighter green layer of grass so that you can see my darker stenciled layer in the background with my lighter green layer popped up on the front. It creates some really great dimension when you combine the stenciling with the dimension from the die cuts. Now off camera, I've gone ahead and colored in a bunch of the stamped images, and this is going to be really fun because now that those are done, I just get to put together my card and see how I want things to get laid out. So I've put a white frame around the border, and now I'm just tucking the pieces in where I think I want them to go. Once I have everything finalized, I'm going to glue it down. Some of the images, like the hats, I did trim the white layer down a little bit so that you wouldn't see the white when I put the hats on the elephants' heads. After I had everything glued down, I did add some dream drops to the background, some white gel pen for details and highlights on some of the images, and I also ended up adding some sequins in, and then it just needed a little bit of something else, so I ended up taking my glitter gloss pen and splattering a bunch of shimmer into the background. It's of course hard to see on camera, but the whole thing sparkles and shines in real life when it catches the light. So that's it for this card. Now let's just take a look at all three of the cards that we made today. This is that clean and simple card using one stamped image. This second one uses one large stamped image and a stenciled background. And then this third card, we went all out and used dimension and stencils and so many different stamped images. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed these projects, and I will see you back here soon.